the record. Good morning, everybody. Jamie Wallace here with Q&A meeting, or Q&A Zoom meeting. We're looking at lesson 10, our final Q&A for this class, and we're going to look at our concept design assignment here. So it's our final design project, and yeah, let's take a look at what we've got there. We'll just do a quick overview. There we go. Yeah, so lesson 10 has two parts to it, and our local network survey, which is only worth 4 points, it's pretty straightforward. So we just want to encourage students to take a look at people in their area, local area. It could be instructors or mentors or designers or farmers, could be all sorts of folks, might be clubs or groups, any design build companies that might be in your area. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. That's one of the suggested first steps for somebody trying to get into the industry is hooking up with an existing company and maybe doing a little bit of work with them. But yeah, so that is pretty straightforward. And again, it's only worth 4 points, but it's good to take note of that for sure. So the next part of the assignment, which is the main part, is the concept plan. And we're going to look at various parts of that. And afterwards, I'm going to show you some of the deliverables that we provide for our clients. And it'll give you a complete, well, not completely different, but somewhat different than what you'll have in your template file. Template file is kind of a combination of this educational component with the class plus some structure, and well, it's just a great template to start with. You could easily pare it down a little bit and use it professionally, right, if you wanted to. So we'll take a look at that. And again, we'll start with our concept plan here. Okay, so we have our template file here, and the first slide that we're looking at is going to be our existing base map. So at the bottom here, we obviously have our title block, and we want to make sure we have all that information in place along with an accurate scale, and your north arrow appropriately positioned there. And so that is our first component here. And as you know, you went to great lengths, great trouble in lesson 3 to put that together. So it's gonna be a big part of today's lesson. So again, we're gonna have that placed in this plan here, or in that design sheet. So the next part is when we get into your proposed concept plan. So this is sort of the culmination of what you've learned in the course, some of the ideas you have for your design site. And I would hesitate to guess that if you were to go forward 6 months or a year and you were doing this again, you might do it a little differently. And I think that's one of the beauties of permaculture design or regenerative design or landscape design, is there's no absolute right or wrong way of doing something. And a lot of what we see and articulate within our designs are come from a creative part of us. And I know I've looked back at design work that I've done, and some very early work that was quite large scale. And, I know I would do it differently today. And that doesn't mean that I don't like what I did prior. It's just that, you do change and evolve. So that's one really cool thing about the whole design process. And here are on the left here, there's plant list and databases for researching. So there's a whole bunch of stuff there, and there's a natural capital database. Now I've used that before, and it is quite extensive. There's no doubt of that. And I would say one of the big things with this type of design work is it's not like interior design where you could let's say design a room and apply that, install it, and then come back in a decade, and it would really pretty much be exactly the way you left it, other than it aging a bit, right? Whereas when we get into the landscape, it is we're dealing with all this living material, not only the plants but the soil, and they're very, very dynamic, and things change constantly. So it's very interesting that way, to see how your work performs over the years. And I have gone back and seen designs that I've installed a couple of decades later, and it can be a mixture of sort of wonder and a bit of surprise, depending on who's looking after the landscape. That is a big part of it. But yeah, this is our first part here in our concept sheet here. So we're going to list the design elements that we're thinking about. And when we say concept, it is a macro sort of broad overview. At this point, we're really not getting into, fine details. And as you'll see with some of the deliverables that I'll present, details are sort of something that comes much later. And when we do acreage design, they're actually something that's separated from our original agreement. And we put together a concept. And then once that's done, we can look at detailed planting plan, details for any retaining walls or hard surfaces, any structure, that sort of thing. And typically when we're dealing with small lots, we'll sort of all bundle that into one. It's much easier, but it's quite hard with an acreage setting to know how much detail is going to be required when you're beginning the design process. So yeah, so that is our first sheet. So here is an example. Now, it's one beautiful thing with the template file. We have these examples built into them. And, there's no doubt this is a great concept right here. And then this one here, it's a step up not in terms of the content, but in terms of the graphical display. I believe this was put together by a landscape architect who was taking the course. So you can see there's just some beautiful graphics that are in play here. So that is probably one thing that you'll discover as you continue to work in the design arena, is you're always trying to improve your graphics, and that helps you get your ideas across, because you can tell between these two designs, they're very clear and well labeled, both of them, but one is a little bit easier to visualize than the other, right? But then that takes extra software and tools, and some experience. A lot of these softwares take at least a year to learn, and yeah, they're not easy, and you're never using just one. So this drawing, there's probably 3 or 4 different softwares used at various times to put it together. Yeah, so that is a big part of this lesson here is this concept plan. So some of the things we're asking for is an explanation of the design, and we want to see the design as a whole. So that's all the structures, and we want it says here we're going to label all plants clearly and distinguish them between existing plants. So that is a really good idea. It makes it much easier if we come here. And we can see up here, there's a number of existing plants that have been grayed out, and then there's new plantings. Sorry for the squiggles there. And this makes it very, very easy to determine what's new, what isn't. If there were existing plants that you did not want to retain, you'd want to remove them at this point. Okay, let's see here. We'll go back. Yeah, so again, existing introduced is important to differentiate. And as well, there should be some influence with water. So that's one thing I'm going to show you with some of our my company's deliverables is that we do prioritize water in the landscape, and that's one of the first design layers that we look at. And really that does drive the landscape. And what follows, you know, the plant end of it is really the icing on the cake. And you know, ultimately, and I haven't gotten there yet, but that's one of my goals, is ultimately we want to put together landscapes that require very little to no water input. That's I would say that is the ultimate. That's my opinion. I think it's pretty hard to do that with compost and those inputs, but on the water end, it should be completely doable. And for inspiration, and I know this has been inspiration. Okay, here. Oh, Brad Lancaster's great inspiration for this. He's got a fantastic website here. And there are just so many ways that one can utilize stormwater coming off of a road. I mean, there's just all sorts of different approaches. And of course, you need to be in alignment with your local municipality or county, because, you know, you are sort of playing a little bit with their infrastructure. So do check that website out. And he has 2 excellent books here. I'm not trying to sell Brad's books for him, but I will say that I have both, and they're fantastic. And they are geared for drylands, right? But in some ways, when you look at the West Coast anyways, of North America, it behaves like a dry land during the growing season. So there's a lot of things there we can look to. And I know Jennifer has headed more eastern on the eastern US here. So that may not be quite as big a deal for you, but yeah, it's again a really interesting resource that you can check out. So we want to have all the elements, all the plants, and these can be general. We don't have to identify each plant specifically in terms of its botanical name. It could be just fruit tree, it could be shrub, it could be, just to give us an idea of whether it is a tree, shrub, or herbaceous plant or climber, and then a little bit of a short narrative. So this is a really nice way to present a drawing. And in the past, we used to do more of a narrative with our work, but because we present all of our work in person or on Zoom, the narrative's not quite as important for us. But a few other important items on this would be your mission statement and your goal list. So those, again, are different sheets here. So if we go to the next page, we get this statement of purpose. We get some goals. We also want to see your proposed zones. So these may differ from the original existing zone map you did way back in, I guess it was lesson 4. And your pathways, fences, gates, those might have changed too. So it really does depend on the existing layout of your property or your project site and what you're trying to do with it. I would say with smaller urban spaces, you're going to have less potential change, but there still may be some in there. And then larger spaces, you're likely to have more of that built into it. So again, here's a great example and statement of purpose and a zone map. And then goals here, right? So that's a good thing to have. What are you going to try and do to sort of phase all this in? It kind of overlaps a little bit with what we request a bit later in the assignment. And then here is another example. So both very good, both telling us similar things. Looks like the goals in this are a little more extensive. And I wouldn't underestimate the value of setting these goals, because again, even if you're working for somebody else, you need to know what you're trying to do with this. Why were you hired? What is it that the current landscape has that doesn't work for the client? So that should blend all into this overall goal for you. Yeah, so this is pretty straightforward. And again, we want to keep that title block consistent. And then the next step here is we're wanting to learn a bit more about your water management plan. So with all you've learned in the course here and the whole approach with impervious surfaces and the fact that that's a huge resource. What can we do with that in order to enhance the landscape? So unfortunately, there are so many houses currently that have asphalt shingle roofing. That seems to be, probably 99% of the homes out there have that. And there are, again, some really good approaches for using that water. That water is not really safe to store and use in an edible landscape, or certainly not annual or herbaceous plants. So I would recommend to avoid that. But you do want to take advantage of it. And if we look at rain gardens, which I know you've probably heard me go on and on about before, this is an excellent resource. Rain Garden Handbook for Western Washington, and I'd highly recommend that. I can put that in the chat here. but I'm sure it's pretty familiar to most or all of you at this point in the course. But yeah, great resource. And I'd say one of the most valued parts of this are at the back where it starts getting into the different zones of a rain garden and plants that work within each one. Yeah, so let us see here. We have an example. This person has put together a plan to use their water. They've indicated where spigots are and where they're going to run lines. It may be that you want to just run irrigation in your project site, and I would highly recommend that. That's something we do with all new landscapes. You may be wanting to put in a rain garden or some swales or any, there's any number of ways that you can use water from an impervious surface. Here we're showing water flows through the site. That's very helpful. And they're trying to capture overland flows. And that can be done in a few different ways: rain gardens, boomerang swales, hugelkultur, diversion swales. Again, this is very much a site-specific thing. So if on certain sites, swales might be a great idea. On others, like we're just starting a design right now on a property that's almost pure sand. And swales would not be a good idea because they would be most likely constructed and never see a drop of water. Just because there's so much infiltration. So there would be virtually no overland flow there. So you want to be mindful of the tools and where they best work. Here's a little mention of keyline, and we've touched on that during the class, during the Q&A anyhow. But that's a really powerful tool for larger sites. I would say these aren't quite large enough, but keyline design or keyline plowing are really good options that you might want to consider, especially for compacted areas. Yeah, so that is our water, and that for my company, my wife's, this is a really big first step. The next is soil fertility, and that again is sort of following in the footsteps of the water. And if there are any rainwater harvesting structures planned, we'd want to follow those with our plantings and our increased soil fertility. It's because if we have water moving in the landscape, it is certainly going to drive the fertility. It really is going to dictate a lot. Easy way to test that is just walking down a sort of country road and looking off the edge of it into a roadside ditch, and you can see huge difference between the top of the ditch and the bottom of the ditch in terms of plant growth, possibly what's living there, and the fertility itself. So yeah, so here are some examples. This person wants to get into some composting, and they're going to increase water retention. So that's another thing, just increasing the fertility or the organic content of your soils, just 1%, will give you an extra 20,000 US gallons of storage per acre. So by far, that's the easiest way to hold on to water on the site, and the least expensive is to improve your soils so they are like a sponge. Yeah, so there should be another example here that introduces the water and the fertility. And again, this person's looking at nitrogen fixers, dynamic accumulators, hugel, mulch, compost, gray water, and fertigation. They must have a duck pond. No, not a duck pond, but a pond itself. So this is the sort of thing you want to think about. And I don't mean these specific ideas, I mean more of a broad approach. If your soil fertility plan relied on one approach, that's a little bit risky. You can look at big ag right now and large monocrop farms. They very much have very narrow soil fertility goals. A lot of it relies on inputs through synthetic fertilizer. But here we want to take a broad approach. And that way, some things may be more effective than others. And that might even be seasonal or annual. 1 year, one approach might be really, really effective. Like for instance, where I live, most years we have in our annual vegetables, we love to grow cover crops where we have less activity at that time. So if we've harvested a crop, we want to cover that soil. We want to have something living in there. So bang, we'd put in some cover crop. Now this year we've had a lot of deer pressure. We've had deer get into our landscape, and there's 4 fawns here. So, everything's gone out the window because we have deer fencing around our perimeter, but because they've breached that, there isn't a second level of protection for us. So we have very few annual vegetables this year, and certainly no cover crop. So again, you want to take a broad approach, and that way, if you run into any challenges, you're going to have some movement forward anyhow. So this is so huge for us and our success. It's a lot of it is based on enhancing soil fertility. If we didn't, even if we were importing new soil to a site, it's going to fail miserably without additional help through compost or what have you. So yeah, this is a real driver. And let's go back to our lesson here. Okay. We're still in that soil fertility. We're more into vegetation elements. So again, these are broad and they don't have to be too exact. The student has identified some specifics, right? You don't have to do that, but if you have that in the back of your head, sure, that sounds great. And they've got pathways here, so good access. And some of their pathways are wider than others. That's also a good idea, just for wheelbarrow access. For us, we do, just as a example here, we have followed basically what market gardeners do. And this is Curtis Stone here. He's a market gardener in Canada, or used to be. He's doing more homestead work now. But his premise, and it wasn't just him, this is industry wide, is having 30-inch growing beds with 12-inch pathways. And if you want to create, the most efficient annual vegetable space, that's been my experience to doing this. It's easier on all sorts of levels here. Just one sec, sorry. Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, very, very effective. A few examples of that are, well, you can see there's irrigation right here. So the irrigation is centralized, right? You can water multiple beds in with this type of setup where it's overhead irrigation. Because they're 30 inches wide, you could straddle the bed. So you could have 1 foot on one side, 1 foot on the other, and you can be weeding. You could be, although if you do it right, you don't have to weed, but you could be harvesting. You can see these are fairly tight, the plantings here. So there's less opportunity for weeds. And if you do a no-till approach, you're going to reduce weed potential greatly. Now, that is opposed to this approach, right? So it really depends on what you're trying to do. For us, we're growing all our vegetables, well, 95% of our vegetables through the year. And if we had raised beds, we'd need a lot of them. And these aren't these cost money to put together. The disadvantage of this is to irrigate them. We have to have some separate irrigation on each box. So what we've done is the bulk of our annual veg is like this. And then when we are close to our house, right outside the south side of our house, our kitchen, we have a bunch of boxes. So we kind of have a little of both. And these we can put early crops in. They have a little bit of protection. The downside of them is these are going to dry much faster during the growing season, although they warm up much faster during the spring, and they potentially hold a bit more heat in the fall. So there's some good and bad to that. But there is a place for both. And again, I really think this is such a game changer if you're trying to grow a lot of vegetables and you want to be efficient with your time and all your materials. So yeah, that's just a little spiel on that. Yeah, so these are some great examples of vegetation. And again, these people got fairly specific, and you can do that if you wish, but you don't have to. So yeah. And let's see here, a little more detail, and yeah, just a few more notes here about the areas. It's kind of a second part. And then we get to the phasing. And this is probably the hardest. This is very hard to do. if you haven't done this before, because, you know, how long is it going to take me to do this? And probably the first time you do it will take a lot longer than the next. So we, oh, that's one thing I should show you guys. So I have, when you get, let's say you were going to do more design work and you want to start to install, you can get some resources that'll help you with production rates, and it'll help you build a quote, so to speak, or an estimate. And so this go around, this might be a tricky thing to navigate. Again, just because you don't know, and even pricing for plans can vary quite a bit if you're buying them in a retail setting versus wholesale. So a wholesale market's going to be much lower. In fact, it's about half price if you're buying at wholesale. That's my experience. So if you're installing for somebody, you definitely want to find a wholesaler in your area. It'll definitely help you out there. So this is a tricky part, but it's a good exercise to go through. And I would say in my early years of my work, this was my weak point. I could design and build, but trying to forecast all of this and estimate, that was really hard. So it's something that I worked on later in my career, and now I'm good with it. But it does take a little bit of practice, and I would say even if you're starting to do installations, is to document everything you do, and document your time and see how long it typically takes you to do these various tasks. And then we get into the social permaculture and permaculture principles. That is very straightforward, along with your SWOT analysis. So that is pretty much what we're after here. And of course, we want to use the rubric when we're putting our plan together, and just make sure we're including everything that's been asked for here, because that's basically what I use to grade your stuff. So yeah, so what I think we'll do, Jennifer, do you have any questions at all at this point? Happy to go over anything.
No, that was really straightforward. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. I think what I'll do is just give you a little peek here at design that we completed. So instead of, you know, the template file is 150 pages or more, and that would be really hard to provide a client that much information, right? So it's a great tool for the course and as an educational component, but if you're designing for somebody else, you may want to think about what you'd want to include for them. What is really important? So is providing, let's say, a building survey important, or, you know, the ecological succession, or, you know, there's probably a lot of things that, you know, might even overwhelm a client, because often when we are working for other people, their knowledge of permaculture or regenerative design is going to be, you know, somewhat limited. So we don't want to overwhelm them, but we want to provide lots of value, right? So here's an urban design we did, and you can see instead of 154 sheets, we have 7, right? And so let's just go through these while we have a couple minutes. And I will show you what we've done. So first of all, we do a sector compass or sector map. And much like everybody did in the course here, we have our base plan, we have the sector map, and we are going to make sure that we reference this as we go through the design. So with this particular design, a couple of critical things that we need to keep in the back of our mind is this flood potential here and the privacy. So those are two really big chunks. And of course, we need to keep in mind the sun and where it is on the site. And we know wildlife is going to have an opportunity to get in, but deer in this location, the deer are quite, I won't say rare, but because it's more of it's close to a busy sort of shopping area, that they're not that active. So yeah, and then we do a little explanation here about what the sector map is, because most people that we work with, may not know what that is. We label it. We have a north arrow, a scale. And then with our work, we have revision notes here so that we know which is, we did the sector map and we revised it. So that's the first thing we do, is put together the sector map, show it to our clients before anything else and say, hey, is this what you see? And there was a few minor changes. So we changed those. And then, yeah, we'll move on. So the next layer that we look at is water. And that is a driving force in the landscape. And in this case, we have a couple things that are of interest. We have different areas of the roof that we've identified here, A through D. We automatically will take the house footprint and offset a 10-foot radius around it. And that is helpful for us in that we do not, especially in an urban design, we do not want to be putting any rainwater harvesting structures within this space. It's just too close to the house. We do not want water loading up on the perimeter or perimeter drainage. So we keep it outside of that. And that's one way that helps us and can show our clients we're thinking about that. And then, yeah, we do some labeling here where we have 3-inch PVC pipe going underground from the roof to the rain garden. And in this case, we have two little rain gardens opposite each other, and they're connected with a pipe. And it looks kind of funny, but it'll make sense as we go along. And then we do some rough calculations here at the bottom. So just off of the residents of this house, we're getting over 109,000 liters per year. So we'll call that sort of 25,000 US gallons, somewhere in there. So that is our first step, is water. And then the next thing we're going to look at is access and how people move on the site. We include patios, structures, fencing, retaining walls, anything hard like that, hardscape. So we have grayed out. We've included the water and we grade that out. We included the base plan and we are putting some emphasis on the hard elements here. And I won't go through each of those, but there was a desire to have a little seating area in the front, a larger partially covered seating area here, and then 2 new structures, sort of an office and tool shed or studio, along with a walkway to there. And they wanted on-site parking, so we created some parking here, as well as over here. So they are actually on site when they pull their cars in. And so that's access. So now we've got the water, now we have the access, and we drop in the actual plant end of it, the soft landscape, which is the soil layer. So we have turf areas in green, we have planting areas in brown. So you can see there's not very much turf out here. There's very little, but enough to create a bit of a contrast. And our clients here did want some greenscape or green space, sorry. And here, whenever we get into these narrow grass areas, one way of preventing damage to that lawn is putting little stepstones in place. So this way, in the off season, it's not going to turn into mud. And we have some existing plants we're relocating here. So that is our last layer, and then they all overlay onto each other. And this would be our concept plan. So we have some general plantings. We have trees and shrubs and some herbaceous plants here. We've got a few little annuals. Yeah, so that's it. So we're just sort of looking at things in a very broad view. And then once we get beyond that, we can start to look at details, which we have here. So we've done a detailed planting plan. So each individual plant is identified. And I won't get too far into that. I will show you how we label them, but our software is helpful that way. Let's see here. Okay. So this would be the botanical name. This is the size, the pot size. So when we go buy it, how big is it? It's a number 3 or a 3-gallon. And then this is the common name, blue crop, blueberry. And then this is how many units there would be. So in this landscape, there's 10. And then all of these are introduced into this planting plan here, or sorry, plant list. And this list is what we send out to wholesalers for pricing. And it has the Latin or botanical name, common name, quantity, and the size. So we just take a screenshot of that and send that off. We don't include the comments. And then this is something we do often is these data visualizations. So we can, that's a cool thing our software will do. It will identify in whatever colors we select these different plant types. So annual veg, conifers, edibles, ferns, ornamental grasses, perennials, shrubs, and trees. So just by looking at this, if we wanted a feel for how much tree and shrub material we have, we can easily see that. So the front area here has got this framework or structure. So we know in the middle of the winter, this structure is going to provide, including an existing tree that's here. And then down the side, the same thing. So I find this quite helpful. It's something that you want to keep in mind as you're placing plants together. You do want to, it depends on what you're trying to achieve, but often in urban areas, there's privacy issues. You want to try and enclose the space and then put different plants within that, smaller, more dynamic things. That's the beauty of the herbaceous plants. Okay, so that's our planting plan. So that is a detail, and that's something that we're not doing in the course because, we would need another another week at least, or another lesson. And again, these sort of details are part of that. So what kind of pavers, how are those constructed? A little bit of alum block, what's that look like? As well as the rain garden, some basics with that. How's that going to be put together? And that's it. So that is our 7 sheets for that particular project. So happy to chat about anything regarding that. If there's any questions at all, Jennifer, that's up to you. Yeah, so it looks like we're getting towards the end of the hour here. Is there anything you want to go over, Jennifer, at all, other than what we've covered today? I'm happy to touch on anything I might have missed that you're interested in.
No, that all, it gives me a lot of information and a good starting point. So I think I'm gonna dive back into the videos
Right on.
and get going on the final concepts.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that was very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, thank you very much for being part of the course. And I really look forward to seeing your design next week when you have it put together. And yeah, best of luck with that. And if you run into any challenges or anything, just drop me a note and I'll do my best to point you in the right direction.
Okay, thank you. Have a great
Oh,
week.
yeah, you too. Take care.
You too.
Bye
Bye-bye.
bye.